Chapter 1, The Perfect Afternoon. The sun hung high in the cloudless summer sky, spilling golden light across the rooftops and bathing the apartment complex in a warm, almost lazy glow. It was the kind of day that demanded relaxation, not politely, but insistently, as though the weather itself had conspired to slow life down. The pool shimmered like a pane of liquid glass, the water catching the sunlight in 100 tiny mirrors that danced with every ripple. Marcus had been looking forward to this moment all week. Work had been relentless, the kind of week where emails seemed to multiply overnight and meetings dragged on like a stubborn shadow. Friday had come and gone in a blur, and Saturday had greeted him with errands that stole the morning away. But now, finally, Sunday afternoon had arrived, his time. Dressed in loose navy swim trunks and a plain white t-shirt, Marcus stepped out onto the stone path that led from his building to the pool area. In one hand, he carried a tall glass of lemonade, cold enough that condensation traced little rivers down the sides, and in the other, his favorite paperback novel. The book's spine was bent in a familiar way that only a truly loved book acquires. The smell of chlorine mingled faintly with the sweetness of blooming jasmine from a nearby garden bed, and somewhere, faintly, a lawn-mower droned, distant enough not to be annoying, close enough to be part of the afternoon's soundtrack. He chose his usual spot, the second lounge chair from the corner, shaded halfway by a tall umbrella. It was the perfect compromise, enough shade to keep the heat bearable, enough sun to warm his skin. Setting the lemonade down on the small side table, he eased into the chair, feeling the cushion give way just enough to cradle him. Marcus slipped off his flip-flops and stretched his legs out, toes brushing the warm fabric at the chair's end. He tilted his head back and let the sunlight hit his face. Eyes closed, he could hear the faint trickle of water from the pool's filtration system. Occasionally, a breeze would stir, carrying with it the scent of sunscreen from a family that had left earlier, traces of their laughter still echoing faintly in the air. Opening his book, Marcus picked up exactly where he had left off the night before. The soft rustle of turning pages blended with the distant hum of traffic from the street beyond the complex walls. Every so often, he would glance up from his reading to watch the sunlight fracture on the pool's surface. The world felt, for once, unhurried, like a song playing at just the right tempo. The music from his small wireless speaker played low, just enough to fill the space immediately around him without intruding on anyone else's peace. A mellow jazz playlist, the kind that made you tap a finger on your leg without realizing it. Each saxophone note seemed to fold itself into the lazy rhythm of the afternoon. He sipped his lemonade, the ice clinking softly against the glass. The tart sweetness hit his tongue, perfectly balancing the warmth of the air. Marcus smiled to himself. He loved moments like this, when life felt both simple and full, when there was nothing to fix, solve, or rush toward. A dragonfly skimmed over the water, its gossamer wings catching the light like stained glass. For a long moment, Marcus just watched it dart and hover, tracing invisible patterns in the air. Somewhere above, a lone cloud drifted lazily, as though it too had nowhere to be. His phone buzzed once on the table beside him. He glanced at the screen, saw a notification from a group chat, and ignored it. Today wasn't for small talk or errands or news alerts. Today was for breathing, deeply, intentionally, and letting the noise of the world pass him by. He adjusted his position, leaning slightly to the side to rest an elbow on the chair's armrest. A page turned. The story in his hands pulled him deeper, the real world softening at the edges. Occasionally, a laugh or a splash from a child at a nearby apartment would punctuate the stillness, but these sounds felt like part of the environment, not interruptions. Marcus had chosen this complex partly because of the pool. In the chaos of city living, it was his personal oasis, a place where he could feel as though he were on vacation without packing a bag. Over the past year, he had spent countless hours here, early morning swims before work, late afternoon naps on weekends, and quiet nights lying back to watch the stars. It was his space, familiar and safe. He shifted his sunglasses slightly, feeling the warmth gather on the bridge of his nose. The umbrella's shadow moved almost imperceptibly as the sun began its slow arc downward, painting everything in slightly softer tones. He made a mental note to take a quick dip before heading back inside later. For now, the chair was too comfortable, the book too absorbing. The rhythmic sound of the pool's water pump, the faint jazz, the sun on his skin, everything combined into a kind of meditative calm. He thought about how rare it was to have days like this, when there was nothing demanding his attention. For once, the to-do list in his mind was blank. And so Marcus read, and sipped his drink, and let himself be part of the quiet poetry of the afternoon. He could almost believe the world outside this courtyard didn't exist, that life was made of nothing but sunlight, cool water, and the whisper of turning pages. He didn't know, in that moment, that the stillness was about to be broken. That within minutes, the peaceful rhythm of the day would be replaced by sharp voices and questions he hadn't invited. But for now, for these precious, final minutes, the afternoon was perfect. Chapter 2, The Unwanted Arrival. The first sign that the afternoon was about to change came not as a sound, but as a shadow stretching across Marcus's page. He felt it before he saw it, the sudden coolness on his forearms, the way the light dimmed just enough to nudge his attention away from the sentence he'd been savoring. He glanced up, expecting to find the sun tucked behind a passing cloud. Instead, he saw two figures framed by the wrought iron gate that led into the pool courtyard. They were in uniform. The kind that made people sit up straighter even when they had nothing to hide. One officer, tall, square-shouldered, pushed the gate open with a measured, unhurried hand. The other followed, shorter but thick through the chest, the radio on his shoulder chattering for a split second before he dialed the volume down. Their boots clicked against the stone path that wound between potted palms and low bushes, and in the space of a few steps, their presence redefined the air. Marcus placed a thumb in his book to hold his page and set it gently on the side table next to the sweating glass of lemonade. He had lived long enough in this city to know that calm worked better than surprise, and that surprise worked better than fear. Still, something deep in his body, old echoes, family lessons, history, tightened subtly in his chest. The tall one scanned the pool area with a practiced sweep of the eyes. Empty chairs. An abandoned towel. A sign that read "No lifeguard on duty" in weathered red letters. Then both officers' gazes settled on Marcus, alone beneath the umbrella, jazz murmuring out of his small speaker. "Afternoon," the tall officer said, tone clipped and official rather than warm. His nameplate read Hawkins. The shorter officer, Ramirez, hung back half a pace and let Hawkins set the rhythm. "Afternoon," Marcus echoed, neutral. He straightened, swung his legs off the lounger, and set both feet on the ground. He stayed seated. A deliberate choice, neither casual nor confrontational. He'd learned that the space between those two postures could be dangerous, and that the safest place to rest was an exact expression of ease. "You a resident here?" Hawkins asked, as if he were asking for the time. Not quite a challenge. Not quite, not one. "Yes," Marcus said. "Building C." Hawkins nodded like he'd expected that answer all along and was waiting for the real conversation to start. "We got a call," he said. "Concern about someone at the pool who doesn't belong." The words landed with a quiet thud between them. Marcus heard the subtext, the invisible brackets around the sentence. Concern about someone who doesn't belong. He thought, briefly, of the dragonfly he'd been watching minutes earlier, how it had cut figure eights over the water without asking for permission to exist. I belong, Marcus said evenly. Can I help you with something specific? Ramirez's gaze flicked to the closed clubhouse door, to the keypad at the gate, to Marcus's speaker. He seemed to be counting facts in his head and deciding which ones mattered. Do you have your resident key? He asked. Marcus nodded and reached, slowly, deliberately, for the lanyard looped around the arm of his chair. The plastic card at the end was scuffed and slightly bent from a year's worth of use. He held it up so they could see the complex's logo, the little barcode, his photo. Here you go. Hawkins didn't step close enough to take it. He looked at it from a polite distance, then at Marcus again. Can we see some ID with your name? He asked. It was a familiar escalation, not just residency, but identity, not just belonging, but proof of personhood. Marcus felt the tightness in his chest spool one more turn. He kept his voice level. Sure, he said. He reached for his wallet, gestures slow, palms visible, like a dance he practiced too many times. He pulled out his driver's license and extended it. Hawkins took it this time. Ramirez shifted his weight, one hand resting on his duty belt as if it were a rail on a steep staircase. Hawkins studied the card longer than necessary. Marcus Reed, he read. Address on file is, yeah, Building C. He squinted at the tiny text, then held the card up toward the sun as though better light would make something hidden appear. Nothing did. He handed it back with a tight-lipped nod, but his stance didn't soften. How long have you lived here, Mr. Reed? Ramirez asked. The question wore the costume of conversation. It was not conversation. A little over a year. You know the property rules? Hawkins asked. No guests without a resident present. No glass containers. No after-hours access. I do, Marcus said. I'm here alone. Plastic cup. He lifted the lemonade, let the ice clink, set it back down. Hours are posted. I'm within them. Silence pulled thin for a heartbeat. A car horn bleated faintly from the street beyond the brick wall. Somewhere, a door shut. Jazz whispered through a saxophone phrase and tapered into a hush. Mind telling us what you're doing here today? Hawkins asked. The words were simple enough. The tone threaded them to a different meaning, explain your presence. Marcus felt the flare of offense like a match struck in his throat. He swallowed it. Relaxing, he said. Reading. Enjoying the pool I pay to access. Hawkins's jaw worked, a muscle ticking near his ear. Ramirez glanced toward the gate as if expecting the caller, the anonymous, concerned neighbor, to materialize and confirm their suspicions or dispel them. No one appeared. Look, Marcus said, not to placate, but to set boundaries with words, you've seen my resident pass and my ID. I live here. Is there anything else you need from me? Hawkins's eyes flicked to the speaker again, to Marcus's towel, to the lounge chair, as though searching for a violation that would justify an instinct. We've had break-ins, he said finally, non sequitur draped as context. We're just checking things out. With respect, Marcus said, checking things out usually looks like asking a couple of questions and then moving on when everything lines up. Everything lines up. Another beat. Hawkins's hand went to the radio on his shoulder. He pressed the button, murmured something Marcus couldn't catch, waited for a crackle of static and a reply. Marcus watched the tiny dance, the way information moved through systems, the way people sometimes leaned on those systems to avoid admitting they were wrong. Ramirez took a step closer to the sign that listed pool rules and traced a finger under the line that read residents and registered guests only. You have any guests with you today? He asked, still searching for an angle. No. Anybody else use your key to get in earlier? Hawkins added. No. Someone reported loud music, Ramirez said, nodding at the speaker. Marcus turned the volume down 2 clicks even though it had been low enough to begin with. Better? He asked. Ramirez shrugged. Just responding to a call. A robin landed on the rim of a planter, hopped twice, and flew off. The world, absurdly, continued. Marcus became acutely aware of the way he was holding himself, shoulders even, hands visible, voice smooth, a careful choreography meant to keep the moment from acquiring electricity. He could feel his heartbeat in his wrists. I'm not trying to give you a hard time, Hawkins said, but the tone carried a friction that contradicted the claim. Just doing our job. And I'm just living my life, Marcus said. You can do your job without turning my Sunday into an incident. Something in the word incident made Hawkins's gaze sharpen, as if Marcus had dared to name the specter they were all pretending wasn't in the room. Ramirez shifted, cleared his throat. Do you have a manager we can call? He asked. Leasing office? It's Sunday, Marcus said. Office is closed. But they'll confirm I live here. They've confirmed it every month when they cash my rent. For a moment, the three of them stood in a triangle of wariness and heat, the sun pressing down, the umbrella casting a precise crescent of shade across the stones at Marcus's feet. Hawkins's radio chirped again, a voice half swallowed by static. He listened, nodded, clicked the mic, spoke softly. Marcus caught only fragments. Resident. Building C, copy. He felt the smallest surge of vindication, then immediately, deliberately, let it pass. Vindication could make a person careless. Careless could be mistaken for disrespect. Disrespect, he knew, could turn a routine interaction into a headline. He inhaled slowly through his nose, exhaled just as slow. Hawkins lowered his hand from the radio and seemed to recalibrate, as if he'd reached a fork and didn't love either path. He looked at Marcus's book, at the condensation ring the lemonade glass had left on the table, at the outline of a life that was ordinary and therefore, in some eyes, suspect. You understand why we have to check, he said, aiming now for reason. I understand you got a call, Marcus said. I also understand that I've been here an hour, minding my business, and the only thing that changed is 2 officers walked in and asked me to explain my presence in my home. Ramirez opened his mouth, closed it. Hawkins's face was a study in control. He glanced toward the gate again, then back. The edge in his posture eased a degree, not much, but enough to register. All right, Hawkins said at last. Mr. Reed. We've confirmed you're a resident. Marcus nodded once, not a bow, not a thank you for permission he'd never needed. Good. Do us a favor and keep the volume down, Ramirez added, gesturing at the speaker though it was barely audible now. I will, Marcus said. He reached for the book, then paused. He felt the pivot point. How this moment could end as silently as it began, or how it could drag forward on the strength of unasked questions and unchallenged doubt. Hawkins turned a fraction, as if to leave, then hesitated. The pause told Marcus that the scene hadn't fully released its grip yet. He knew that feeling, the reluctance to walk away when something inside you wanted the last word, the confirming detail, the little nod from the universe that said you'd been right to lean in hard. Marcus made a decision. He set the book down, placed both hands palms up on his thighs, and met Hawkins's gaze without heat or apology. The gesture was small, but it said everything. I am not hiding. I am not afraid. I am not going to perform comfort for you. Have a good day, officers, he said. The words were polite, but there was steel threaded through them. For a beat, no one moved. The dragonfly returned, cut a brief arc over the water, and vanished into sunlight. Somewhere beyond the wall, a siren wailed and faded. Finally, Hawkins gave a short nod. Ramirez did the same, the set of his mouth loosening by a millimeter. They turned toward the gate. The metal creaked softly as it swung open. As they stepped out, their boots receded from clicks to whispers to nothing. The courtyard exhaled. Marcus stayed very still. He listened to the thin hush left in their wake, to his own breath evening out, to the jazz resuming its gentle climb like a plant finding the sun after a shadow passes. He picked up his book, but didn't open it. Not yet. The afternoon had been remade. He felt the shape of it, unfamiliar now, tilted. He looked at his phone on the table, the black glass catching a warped reflection of sky. He hadn't recorded anything. He hadn't needed to. Not this time. But something had shifted, a private ledger entry, a mark on the day that wouldn't erase. He took a sip of lemonade. The ice had melted some. The drink was sweeter, less sharp. He set it down and finally flipped his book open to the waiting page, though his eyes didn't move across the lines. He knew there would be a next part, because life arranged itself that way, one moment stacking onto the next until the pattern demanded a response. He turned down the volume on the speaker another notch. The pool's surface quivered, then stilled. Overhead, a gull coasted on a thermal, wings hardly moving. Marcus read the same sentence 3 times, absorbing none of it, feeling instead the quiet hum of resolve gathering under his skin. The afternoon wasn't perfect anymore. But it wasn't over. Chapter 3, The First Question. The gate had barely clanged shut behind the 2 officers when Marcus thought, briefly, that it was over. That they had satisfied whatever suspicion had brought them here and would now leave him to his book, his drink, and the heat of the afternoon. But then, footsteps again. Not the fading rhythm of departure, but the measured return of someone who has decided there's more to say. Marcus didn't even have time to look up before Hawkins's voice cut across the pool area. "Hey, Mr. Reed," he called, the tone stripped of any pretense of casualness. "Just one more thing." Marcus placed his book face down on the table. "Yes," he said, keeping his voice neutral. The officers approached again, Hawkins in the lead, Ramirez a half step behind like before. Hawkins's eyes didn't wander this time, they locked directly onto Marcus's face, searching for something. A tell, an inconsistency, a flicker of guilt. "What are you doing here?" Hawkins asked, voice firm now. The words came like a demand rather than a question. "Do you live here?" The phrasing struck Marcus harder than he expected. A moment earlier, he had been a confirmed resident. His ID and pass had been verified. But here it was again, an invitation to justify his existence, a door to the same interrogation opening all over. "Yes," Marcus said again, slowly. "I live here. Building C." "That's what you said," Hawkins replied. "Just making sure you understand why we're asking. We had a report." Marcus raised a hand slightly, not enough to interrupt, but enough to signal that he'd heard it all before. "You had a report about someone at the pool who didn't belong. And now you're asking me the same thing you already confirmed." Hawkins's jaw worked in silence. Ramirez stepped forward. "We just want to make sure," he said, his tone softer but his words carrying the same weight. Marcus breathed in through his nose, slow and deliberate, and let the air out without answering immediately. The pause was purposeful. "I belong here," he said finally. "You've seen the proof. Is there something else you need?" Hawkins's expression didn't change, but Marcus saw the flicker of irritation behind his eyes. There was a rhythm to encounters like this, an unspoken expectation that the question person would lean into compliance, provide not just the answers but the reassurance. Marcus refused to give that extra part, the part that required him to perform his own innocence. "What were you doing before we arrived?" Hawkins asked. Marcus looked at him for a beat. "Reading a book. Listening to music. Drinking lemonade. That's it. That's it." Hawkins glanced at Ramirez, and Marcus caught the exchange in their eyes, some silent calculation about whether his answers were too curt, too steady. Ramirez shifted his stance. "Anyone come in with you earlier?" "No. No guests today?" "No." "Why are you sitting here alone?" Ramirez asked. Marcus gave a short laugh, not amused, more incredulous. "Because I enjoy my own company," he said. "Because it's peaceful. Because it's Sunday and I pay rent here." The breeze stirred the umbrella above him, casting its shadow a little differently across the table. The sound of water trickling through the pool's filter was the only thing filling the space between their words. Hawkins nodded toward the speaker. "Music bothering anyone?" "It's quiet," Marcus said. "You can barely hear it unless you're standing here." Ramirez glanced back toward the complex buildings, as if the mysterious caller might appear at a window and confirm their claims. No one did. Then Hawkins leaned in, just slightly, not enough to break personal space, but close enough to make the air feel heavier. "Do you mind telling me," he said, "why someone would call in a complaint about you?" Marcus tilted his head. "I think that's a better question for whoever made the call." Hawkins's lips pressed into a line. "We don't get to pick and choose which calls we respond to. And I don't get to pick and choose whether I'm targeted by those calls," Marcus replied, the words even but unmistakably edged. For a moment, they stood in a standoff, not a loud or explosive one, but the kind that exists in the invisible current between two people. The saxophone in Marcus's playlist hummed a low note and faded into a pause. "I'm not here to give you a hard time," Hawkins said at last. Marcus met his gaze. "You already are." Ramirez looked down at his boots, then back up. "We're just doing our job," he repeated. Marcus leaned back in his chair, one arm draped over the armrest. "I get that," he said. "But your job shouldn't include making a paying resident justify sitting by his own pool." The words hung there, unchallenged. Hawkins's eyes narrowed slightly, not in threat, but in assessment. Ramirez's jaw shifted. "All right," Hawkins said finally. "Enjoy your afternoon." The words were polite, but the delivery wasn't quite. It was the kind of goodbye that left the door open for a return. Marcus gave a single nod. "I will." They turned and began walking back toward the gate again. But Marcus knew, even before the latch clicked behind them, that this was not the last time he would see their shadow stretching across his page that day. Chapter 4, Calm Proof. The click of the gate behind them should have been the sound of peace returning. But Marcus knew better. There was a heaviness still hanging in the air, like the way the sky feels before a storm, not yet breaking, but inevitable. He didn't reach for his book this time. Instead, he sat still, elbows resting on his knees, watching the faint ripples on the pool's surface. He could feel their eyes even before he saw them again. And sure enough, less than a minute later, the officers were back. "No, sorry to bother you again," no explanation. Just Hawkins striding toward him with that deliberate pace that said he'd already decided this wasn't over. Ramirez followed, scanning the space like a security camera set to suspicious activity mode. Marcus straightened. His lemonade glass left a faint ring of water on the small side table as he moved it aside. He didn't want to give them any reason to suggest he was hiding something under his hands. "Mr. Reed," Hawkins began, "we're going to need to confirm your residency again." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Again?" Hawkins didn't answer directly. "Do you have your resident key card on you?" It was right where it always was, looped on a plain black lanyard, hanging off the arm of the chair. Marcus picked it up slowly, letting the motion be visible and deliberate. He held it out at chest height, letting the laminated card catch the sunlight. The complex's logo, a stylized palm tree, was scratched in a few places from regular use. The barcode sticker was a little frayed at the edges, but the black lines were still sharp enough to scan. Below it, his photo stared back, the same neutral half-smile he'd given the leasing office camera when he'd first moved in. "Here," Marcus said. His voice was steady, almost casual. Hawkins leaned forward, peering at it but not taking it from Marcus's hand. He studied the barcode, the apartment number, the issue date. "And this gives you pool access." "That's what it's for," Marcus replied. "Gets me through the gate." "Gym, too." Ramirez stepped closer now. "Can you scan it at the gate for us?" Marcus stared at him. "You want me to leave my chair, walk to the gate, and prove that the card I've been using for over a year still works?" "That would be helpful," Ramirez said. Marcus exhaled slowly through his nose, then stood. The stone tiles under his bare feet were warm, the kind of heat that made you quicken your steps. He reached the gate in a few strides, the officers trailing just behind him. He tapped the card against the small black reader. A high-pitched beep sounded immediately, followed by the metallic click of the gate's lock releasing. Marcus didn't push it open. He turned back to face them instead, letting the moment sit there like an undeniable fact. "Anything else?" he asked. Hawkins's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you have a photo ID with you?" Marcus had expected that one. He walked back to his chair, reached for his wallet, making sure to keep both hands visible as he did, and pulled out his driver's license. He handed it over without ceremony. Hawkins held it in one hand, tilting it toward the sun. He read Marcus's name out loud, Marcus Reed. Then, the address, the same building number, same street, same zip code printed in neat black text. He checked the expiration date, as though it might somehow be out of sync with reality. "Matches your story," Hawkins said finally, handing it back. "My story?" Marcus echoed. "It's not a story. It's my address." Hawkins didn't reply. Instead, he shifted his weight and looked over at Ramirez, who gave a slight shrug, as if conceding, but not entirely letting go. Marcus sat back down, placing the ID and key card on the table beside him. He didn't pick up his book this time either. He could tell they weren't quite done. "We've had some issues with non-residents sneaking into the pool," Ramirez said after a pause. Marcus nodded once. "I'm aware. That's why you have keycard access." "Right," Ramirez said. "But sometimes residents let other people in." "I didn't," Marcus replied. "And no one came in with me. You've seen the proof." Hawkins's gaze flicked to the glass of lemonade. "We also have a no-glass policy in the pool area." Marcus almost smiled. "Plastic," he said, holding it up so they could see. The condensation made it shine in the sunlight. "See-through, maybe, but definitely plastic." Hawkins's lips pressed together again. It was a small thing, but Marcus recognized it, a little frustration at having no foothold left. The officers stood there for another moment, and Marcus could feel the silence growing heavier between them. He decided to fill it, not with anger, but with something else. "Let me save us all some time," he said. You've seen my resident pass. You've seen my ID. You've heard me confirm that I live here. You've watched me unlock the gate. What's really going on here? The question landed between them like a dropped stone. Hawkins didn't answer right away. Ramirez looked off toward the far corner of the pool area, as if the landscaping might offer him an escape from the moment. We're just making sure, Hawkins said finally, but the words rang hollow. Marcus let the silence stretch for a beat, then nodded slowly. Then I think your job here is done. It wasn't said with hostility, just finality. Hawkins shifted his stance again, the toe of one boot tapping lightly against the tile. Then, with a short nod, he turned toward the gate. Ramirez followed, but not before glancing back once, almost as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. The gate clanged shut for the second time that afternoon. This time, Marcus didn't expect peace to return. If anything, the whole encounter had left an electric charge in the air, the kind that made it hard to go back to pretending the day was normal. He sat for a long moment, his ID and key card still lying on the table beside him. He reached for his lemonade, took a slow sip, and stared at the still water of the pool. That was when the thought first formed, not yet a decision, but the seed of one. Next time, I'm recording this. Chapter 5, The Endless Interrogation. Marcus had barely taken another sip of lemonade when the gate creaked again. He didn't even need to look up this time. He could hear it in the rhythm of the boots, the same steady cadence, like a slow drumbeat coming closer. The same faint static from the radios clipped to their shoulders. He set his glass down without a sound and leaned back in the chair, watching their approach. This was the third time in less than 15 minutes. Hawkins spoke first, his tone almost exactly the same as before, authoritative but deliberately polite, a mask that let him ask whatever he wanted without acknowledging the friction beneath it. "Mr. Reed," he said, "we have a couple more questions." Marcus didn't answer right away. He let the sound of the water pump fill the space between them. "All right," he said finally. Ramirez took the lead this time. "Anyone else been here with you today?" "No. No friends? No family?" Marcus shook his head. "No one." Ramirez's eyes flicked to the lounge chairs. "So all of these are empty because—" Marcus smiled faintly. "Because people come and go. Because it's Sunday afternoon and maybe not everyone feels like a swim." Hawkins stepped closer. "Anyone use your key to come in before we arrived?" "No." "Did you see anyone jump the fence?" "No." "Anyone suspicious?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You mean besides the two officers who keep circling me?" Hawkins's jaw tensed at that, but he didn't respond. Ramirez shifted his stance, clearly weighing whether to keep going. The questions came one after another, small, repetitive, rephrased versions of the same suspicion. Where had he been earlier? How long had he been at the pool? Had anyone sat near him? Had he spoken to anyone? Marcus realized what this was. They weren't just checking facts, they were fishing, circling the same questions from different angles to see if his answers would change. He kept them exactly the same. Calm. Measured. No hesitation. And then, in the middle of one more, just to confirm, question, Marcus decided he'd had enough. Without a word, he reached for his phone on the side table. The move made both officers' eyes track instantly, their attention sharpening. Marcus unlocked the screen with a swipe, opened the camera, and hit record. The small red dot blinked in the top corner. The pool area came into frame, both officers standing in front of him, sunlight hitting their badges. Marcus angled the phone slightly so his own face wasn't in shadow. Okay, he said, his voice still calm but louder now, carrying just enough to be picked up clearly on the recording. Let's do this on video. You've asked me the same questions multiple times. I'm going to make sure I have this documented. Neither Hawkins nor Ramirez moved at first. Hawkins finally said, "That's fine. You can record." But his tone had shifted, tighter now, less casual. Marcus kept the lens steady. "So," he said, "just for the record, you've seen my resident pass?" "Yes," Hawkins replied. "You've seen my ID?" "Yes." "You've watched me unlock the gate with my card?" A short pause. "Yes." "And yet you're still questioning whether I live here?" The silence after that question was longer. Ramirez glanced at Hawkins, but neither answered immediately. Marcus let the moment stretch. The sound of the pool filter hummed in the background, the breeze rustled the umbrella above, and the recording caught every second of it. Finally, Hawkins said, "We're responding to a call." Marcus didn't drop his gaze from the screen. "A call from someone who claimed I don't belong here." "That's correct." "And you've confirmed I do belong here?" "Yes." "Then why are we still having this conversation?" The quiet that followed wasn't just awkward, it was heavy, like the air before a thunderclap. The camera caught it all, the way Hawkins's jaw worked, the way Ramirez's weight shifted from foot to foot, the way neither seemed eager to add more words to the recording. Marcus let the phone dip slightly, enough to catch the water shimmering behind them, the empty chairs, the gate standing quietly in the background. The setting looked as calm as it had been when he'd first sat down. The only difference now was the tension in the air, and the fact that it was all being captured. The red recording light blinked steadily in his hand, a reminder to everyone there that the narrative was no longer theirs alone to control. Chapter 6, The Game Changer. The moment the red recording light blinked to life, something in the air shifted. It was subtle, like the faint drop in temperature before rain, but Marcus felt it instantly. Before, Hawkins and Ramirez had carried themselves with the kind of easy authority that comes from knowing they control the conversation. Now, that ease was gone. Their shoulders were still squared, but the edges of their posture had tightened, every movement suddenly more deliberate. Recording changes things. Marcus had learned that from watching other encounters online, how the same questions sound different when an audience can hear them, how tone sharpens under the weight of documentation. He could see it in their eyes now, the quick mental recalibration, the unspoken math of what does this look like on video. He angled the phone slightly higher, catching their faces in full view. "All right," he said, his voice still calm but with a steady rhythm now, as if narrating for the benefit of whoever might watch this later. "We've established I live here. You've confirmed my ID, my resident pass, and watched me unlock the gate. So why are you still here?" Hawkins didn't answer right away. His gaze flicked to the phone lens, then back to Marcus. "We're following up on a call, Mr. Reed. That's all." "That's not all," Marcus replied evenly. "Because the call is disproven, and yet the questioning continues. So I'm asking again, why are you still here?" Ramirez spoke next, his tone softer but guarded. "Sometimes we need to be thorough." Marcus leaned back slightly, keeping the phone steady. "And sometimes," he said, "being thorough turns into harassment. Especially when the person you're questioning has already provided everything you asked for." Neither officer moved. The pool filter hummed steadily in the background. A faint splash from the shallow end, just the breeze pushing water over the edge, broke the stillness. "You understand this is for everyone's safety," Hawkins said, his voice losing just a touch of its earlier certainty. Marcus didn't look away from the phone. "I understand that I'm the only person here you've spoken to today." I understand that you've asked me the same questions in 3 separate visits. And I understand that this entire interaction is now documented, word for word, tone for tone. Ramirez's eyes dropped to the ground for a moment, as if the tiles had suddenly become fascinating. Hawkins's gaze stayed locked on Marcus, but there was a tightness around his mouth now that hadn't been there before. "Look," Hawkins said finally, "we're not here to make trouble for you." Marcus let out a short breath, half laugh, half disbelief. "Then you might want to think about how this looks to someone watching the video later. Because from where I'm sitting, it sure doesn't look like peacekeeping." That landed. Marcus could see it in the flicker of hesitation on Hawkins's face. The balance of the exchange had shifted, not with a raised voice or physical movement, but with the quiet fact that everything was being recorded. And Marcus wasn't just answering questions now, he was asking them. He tilted the phone slightly toward Ramirez. "Do you question every resident like this, Officer Ramirez?" Ramirez straightened. "We respond to calls." "That's not what I asked," Marcus said, keeping his voice firm but calm. "Do you question every resident like this?" Ramirez's mouth opened, closed. "Not always." Marcus nodded once. "Good to know." "And Officer Hawkins, same question. Do you treat every confirmed resident this way, or just me?" Hawkins's jaw flexed. "We handle each situation individually." "Interesting," Marcus said. "Because this individual situation involved confirming my residency multiple times and then returning for more questioning. And now that you're on camera, I notice the questions have slowed down." The silence stretched, filled only by the low murmur of the jazz track still playing from his speaker. It was barely audible now, almost like background music in a film. Hawkins adjusted his stance. "All right, Mr. Reed. I think we're done here." "I agree," Marcus said. "But before you go, I'd like to thank you for confirming, on video, that I live here and have done nothing wrong." Ramirez gave a short nod, one that looked like he was glad to have an exit. Hawkins's nod was slower, heavier, as though conceding ground he hadn't intended to give. They turned toward the gate. The latch clicked, the metal swung open, and their footsteps faded beyond the courtyard wall. Marcus lowered the phone but didn't stop the recording, not yet. He let it run for another 30 seconds, capturing the empty pool area, the calm water, the still air. The visual contrast was deliberate, serenity returned, with no sign of the supposed disturbance that had brought them here in the first place. Finally, he stopped the recording and set the phone down beside his book. He didn't press play yet, he didn't need to. He already knew what he'd caught. Not shouting. Not overt aggression. But the quiet persistence of a suspicion that refused to let go, even when every fact said it should. And now, it wasn't just his word against theirs. It was on record. Chapter 7, The Internet Erupts. Marcus sat there for a moment after the officers left, the umbrella's shadow slowly shifting across his chair. The phone felt heavier in his hand now, not because of its weight, but because of what it contained. He tapped the screen to watch the footage back. The playback filled the small space around him with his own voice, calm but steady, and the officers' measured responses. He watched their faces in each frame, the flickers of hesitation, the way their tone shifted once the camera was rolling. It wasn't explosive drama, no yelling, no sudden movements, but it didn't need to be. The story was in the repetition. The unnecessary circling of questions. The fact that 3 separate times, he'd had to prove that he belonged in his own home. By the time the video ended, Marcus knew he wasn't going to just leave it sitting in his gallery. He opened the Twitter app, though these days it was called X, and began to type. His fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before he started. Today I was questioned by 2 officers at my apartment complex pool. 3 times. I showed my resident pass. My ID. I unlocked the gate in front of them. Still, they kept asking if I lived here. I recorded the last round. This is what it looks like. He attached the video. Added hashtags, hashtag racial profiling, hashtag while black, hashtag this is America. He hesitated, then added one more line. We have to keep documenting. He hit post. The little blue checkmark spun, then the tweet went live. At first, nothing happened. That was always the way, posts drift into the feed like leaves into a river, unseen until someone grabs hold of them. Marcus put the phone down, took a long drink of lemonade, and stared out at the water. 5 minutes later, the phone buzzed once. Then again. Then again, faster. He picked it up. A friend had replied, "This is infuriating. Sharing now." Another, "This happens way too often. Thank you for posting." Then the retweet started. 10. 20. 50. The numbers ticked upward faster than he could refresh. By the time an hour had passed, the video had been viewed over 20,000 times. Marcus scrolled through comments. They knew he lived there and still questioned him. This is why we film everything. The restraint in his voice is incredible. I'd have lost it. Notice how their tone changes the second the camera comes out. Textbook. Journalists began to DM him, local news, then bigger outlets. They wanted permission to use the footage, to ask him about the incident. Marcus's hands were steady as he replied to a few of them, agreeing to share the clip but asking them to blur his apartment number in the background. He wasn't trying to invite strangers to his doorstep. By late afternoon, the video had crossed 200,000 views. Influencers were sharing it. Civil rights organizations had reposted it with their own commentary. One group tagged the city's police department directly, demanding an explanation. It wasn't just the numbers, it was the tone of the reaction. People weren't just angry. They were energized. Marcus saw thread after thread of others sharing their own pool stories, gym stories, parking lot stories. His mentions were a flood of lived experiences, all orbiting the same ugly truth. Suspicion wasn't about rules, it was about who was seen as belonging. By evening, his phone was a constant vibration in his hand. Local activists had started tagging the mayor. A lawyer offered to speak with him pro bono. The phrase, Marcus Reed, was trending in his city. He got a text from an old college friend, "You're on TikTok now, man." Somebody clipped the part where you ask, "Do you question every resident like this, or just me?" It's everywhere. Marcus opened the app. Sure enough, there it was, looping over and over, the caption in bold white letters across the top, "When calm hits harder than anger." The clip already had 1.2 million views. Somewhere around 9 p.m., the city's police department posted an official statement on their Facebook page. "We are aware of a video circulating online regarding an interaction between 2 of our officers and a resident at a local apartment complex. The department takes allegations of racial bias seriously. The matter is currently under review." It was the kind of bland, non-committal language Marcus had expected, but the fact that they'd responded at all told him the pressure was working. He scrolled through the comments under their post. Hundreds of people had linked his video directly, telling the department to watch it again, and ask themselves why this man had to prove himself 3 times. By midnight, the video had over 1 million views. Marcus sat on his couch now, the pool long behind him, the jazz speaker silent. His phone was warm in his hand from hours of use. He thought about the quiet of the afternoon before they'd arrived, the dragonflies skimming the water, the pages of his book, the slow rhythm of breathing without tension. And then he thought about the look on Hawkins's face once the camera came out, that flicker of recognition that the script was no longer theirs alone. Marcus didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. He felt resolved. Because the video wasn't just a record of what had happened to him. It was a fragment of a larger story, one that had been playing out for generations. And now, it had a new chapter, one he'd written without raising his voice, one that belonged not just to him, but to anyone who'd ever been told, in so many words, "You don't belong here." The internet had erupted. But Marcus knew the real test would come next, whether the noise faded, or whether it turned into something that actually changed the way things worked. For now, though, he let the phone rest on the coffee table, screen still lighting up every few seconds with new notifications. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and took a long, steady breath. Tomorrow would bring interviews, statements, maybe even more confrontation. But tonight, the record was already playing. And this time, the whole world could hear it. Chapter 8, Justice in Motion. The following morning, Marcus woke to the sound of his phone buzzing on the nightstand. Not the short, polite vibration of a text, this was a constant hum, an unbroken string of calls, notifications, and messages stacking one on top of another. He reached for it, blinking against the light streaming through the blinds. Overnight, the video had doubled in reach. Over 2 million views on Twitter. Another 800,000 on TikTok. National outlets were picking it up now, he saw headlines on his lock screen. Black resident questions police harassment on camera, video goes viral. Officers investigated after questioning man at his own pool. His DMs were overflowing, friends, strangers, journalists, activists, even a few people he hadn't spoken to in years. At the top of the feed was a message from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Reed, this is Captain Ellis from the City Police Department. We'd like to speak with you regarding your interaction with our officers yesterday. Please call at your earliest convenience." Marcus stared at the message for a moment before setting the phone down. He wasn't ready to speak to them, not yet. By mid-morning, his name was trending nationally. The mayor's office had released a short statement about the importance of equitable policing, and several council members had publicly called for swift accountability. Then, just after lunch, the news broke. Police department announces officers placed on administrative leave pending investigation. It was everywhere, Twitter, Facebook, local news broadcasts. Hawkins and Ramirez's names weren't mentioned officially, but Marcus didn't need confirmation. He knew. The police department's statement was still measured, careful not to admit wrongdoing outright. But the fact they'd acted this quickly spoke volumes. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, coffee cooling beside him, reading comment after comment. People were calling it a victory. Some were thanking him for staying calm. Others said they wished he'd gone further, filed a formal complaint, pressed for disciplinary action. But Marcus knew this wasn't just about him. It was about a system that allowed routine checks to become targeted suspicion. The officer's suspension was a step, not an ending. That evening, a local TV crew came to interview him outside the apartment complex. He wore a plain shirt and spoke without theatrics, just laying out the facts as they'd happened. "When you watch the video," he told the reporter, "you don't see yelling or physical aggression. You see repetition. You see the way suspicion lingers even after proof is given. And you see how quickly the tone changes once a camera is involved." The clip aired on the 6 o'clock news. By 9, he was getting messages from people across the country. A teacher in Ohio. A nurse in Texas. A retired firefighter in Georgia. All telling him they'd had their own pool moment. A few days later, the police department called again, this time with a different tone. The captain explained that the Office of Professional Standards had opened a formal review and wanted Marcus's statement on record. He agreed, but on one condition: the meeting would be recorded, and he could have a legal advocate present. They hesitated, but eventually agreed. The meeting was straightforward. Marcus repeated exactly what the video already showed. He didn't embellish, didn't speculate. Just the facts. He also made it clear, this isn't just about these two officers. It's about why they thought this was normal procedure. 2 weeks later, the department released its findings. The officers had failed to disengage once residency was confirmed. Their repeated questioning was inconsistent with department policy. Mandatory bias training was ordered for the entire unit. Hawkins and Ramirez would remain on leave pending further disciplinary review. It wasn't the sweeping overhaul some people wanted, but it was more than Marcus had expected. The day the report went public, he walked back to the pool. It was late afternoon, the sunlight bending across the water in golden streaks. The same lounge chair was open, the second from the corner, half in shade. He sat down, set his drink on the table, and listened to the quiet. A few kids splashed at the far end. Someone was grilling nearby, the smell of charcoal and spice drifted over the courtyard. For a long moment, Marcus just breathed. He thought about the dragonfly from that day, the one that had skimmed the water without asking for permission. He thought about how quickly peace could fracture, and how much work it took to piece it back together, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong where they were standing. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Thank you. Because of you, my son knows it's okay to stand his ground, calmly, but firmly. You showed him what that looks like." Marcus read it twice, then set the phone down. The pool filter hummed softly in the background. The water shimmered. Somewhere nearby, a bird called out, sharp and brief. For the first time since that afternoon, Marcus felt the rhythm of a Sunday returning, not the exact same as before, but close enough to recognize. He picked up his book, opened to the dog-eared page, and began to read. And this time, when a shadow crossed the chair, it was just a passing cloud.